Hi YouTube. It's been like 2 minutes since my last video, so I was thinking about making another one, and I had the perfect idea while I was at work today. You've seen the title. This is going to be a strongly worded criticism of the type of I consumed X so you don't have to videos. Most commonly found on YouTube, although I am aware that they occur on other platforms as well. I've been kind of always a little bit skeptical of that kind of I'm pitching my media criticism as a replacement for the media itself. Like, I've always been like a little perturbed by that. At the same time, I've never really given a shit ton of thought as to why, other than like the obvious, where people will be like, oh, your opinion isn't yours, that's so cringe. And like, yeah, it is cringe, but I think that's kind of missing the trees for the forest. I don't know, the forest for the trees, the moss for the logs, like whatever metaphor makes sense by the end of this video. I'll let you come up with it. Okay, I'll let you come up with it. Also, I was quite impressed, I'll get this out of the way, by how many people watched my last YouTube video. I was not expecting that, and to be honest, it was kind of nerve-wracking. Like, thinking about the fact that I've sat in a lecture theater with half as many people as watched that video, like, it's kind of crazy to me. At the same time, I don't ever expect that to happen again. So anyway, I'll get on to my points now that I've acknowledged the elephant in the room. So the most obvious thing about these I consumed X so you don't have to videos, and the moment where they get what they want, which is a bunch of people don't consume the actual media, they just have seen the video, is that art is very subjective, Like, everyone takes their own meanings from a piece of media, which is art, Like, I might watch a David Lynch movie and come away with a completely different notion of what it's about than one of my other friends, right? That's kind of an out there example, but I think it's true pretty broadly, right? And so when you have one person or a couple people even, in a certain space where a certain type of media is covered, who then go and look at a specific piece of media, they draw their own subjective meaning from it. And when they present that to a bunch of people who are not the same subject that they are, those people are then taking on that meaning instead of getting their own, right? And that's not just an issue because it's inauthentic. It's an issue because it limits the total, like, collective meanings that have been drawn from a certain text, which I think makes the culture that surrounds the text less vivid, and it diminishes its value as a piece of art. Because to me, like, one of the things that's so valuable about art is the fact that it can be interpreted and different things can be taken away from it. And so when the number of subjective meanings decreases, the value of the art and the conversation around it also decreases. You get what I'm saying? And personally, on a personal level, by the way, I have notes. That's why, if you see me looking, I actually have 3 pages of notes today. I personally dislike when I go into a conversation, either like online or in person, and I'm trying to talk about like a perspective I have about a piece of media, and instead of getting some people who say, oh yeah, I agree, oh yeah, I disagree, here are my reasons for that, or I actually had a completely different opinion, I get the same 3 takes over and over again. Like, this has happened to me for a number of different pieces of media where like I'll go and try to join some kind of conversation about it or whatever, and instead of feeling like I'm talking to, or I've talked to 15 people, I feel like I've not even talked, but been regurgitated to 2 or 3 people's opinions. It's like that. It's just worse, okay? It's just fucking worse, right? Like, it's not as fun. It's not as valuable. For me, like, one of the reasons I like to consume art is so that I can engage with different people's perspectives about it. And so personally, for me, my experience of consuming art is worsened by a kind of economy. Okay, this is my main. I am coining this term today. I don't care if anyone else has said it. I came up with it independently. The trickle-down information economy, I'm calling it, where, and this is much broader than this specific thing, but I'm saying it here for the first time, that the information we have about media, not just like, oh, these are the things that are depicted, but, you know, just any information that you could take away from a piece of media, like lighting, the architecture of the buildings in it, the whatever, yada, yada, yada. Instead of people having the entire picture, there's one person or a few people who have it, who then limit it, whittle it down to what they think is important for their I consumed X so you don't have to video. And then that's what people get. So you see there's like this funnel going on where at the top you have maybe, let's say, example, I've got here this T2 advent calendar. It was a gift. So when I look at this, I see gold lettering, I see patterns, I see red, teal, green. Now imagine I was to make a video about this. And I wouldn't show you. Maybe pretend it's more complex than this, like you can't show a whole movie in a YouTube video. I might say it's got red sides. I might say it's pretty thick. I might say there's gold letters on it. But if you were to actually look at this in person, you would see maybe that the T is brown. You would see that the hand is a Caucasian person. You would see that there's roses on it. You would see that the gold is shiny, okay? And maybe, just maybe, you would have different takeaways from those things that you wouldn't have had you only seen what I had told you. That was a convoluted way to explain something that is probably very simple and you probably got immediately. But yeah, I see it. I see the trickle-down information economy where there are a million documentaries and a million books and a million articles, and yet there are a lot of people, and I'm saying this as someone who knows myself and people other than me, including my wonderful siblings who I love very much, who instead of actually watching those movies or reading those books or reading those articles or listening to those audiobooks or whatever, they just watch a YouTube video called I read X so you don't have to. It's limiting. It's decreasing the overall amount of information that people have, as well as opinions. This is already really long. It's just my first bullet point. All right. So another thing is that this kind of people consuming X via a creator who made a video about it instead of the actual thing is that it leads to those discussions about that media being quarantined online. And the reason for that is because it's fucking embarrassing to talk about a piece of media you haven't seen with someone who has seen it, with the perspective that you know about it via a YouTube video. Because like, it honestly, it becomes very apparent if you talk to someone about a piece of media in real life, if they haven't actually consumed it, you know? Like, you can't bluff for that long. Whereas if you're online, like, you kind of can. Or if someone disagrees with you about your perspective on something, you can just send them like a YouTube video online or a TikTok or whatever. You know, you can link them something. You can't link someone a YouTube video in real life, right? So it makes it so that you don't actually want to talk to people about the piece of media in real life. So it moves conversations about media from anywhere to online specifically, which I think makes those conversations less good. It makes them less good because there are ways that we talk about media in real life that we can't and don't feel like we could online. Like, let's say, you know, when I talk to a friend of mine about a piece of media, they understand my perspective through the lens of everything about me that they know. Whereas online, if I'm like making a comment or something like that, I'm not going into all the details of my life in the comment before I do that, you know? So there are different levels of conversation that you can have. Another thing is you might be more argumentative online than you are in person because you don't like in-person conflict. Like, most people don't enjoy that. So you get different things out of these conversations. And then there are also people who consume media who don't use the internet extensively. And I found that those people often have different perspectives on media than people who use the internet a lot. So if you're only having conversations about a piece of media online, then you're missing those people's perspectives, right? So that's another part that's an issue, is it's so embarrassing to talk about media that you haven't seen, but you've seen a YouTube video about in person. It's just too embarrassing. Another aspect of that, before I move on to the next thing, is that like, I've caught a lot of this video is me talking about things that I've noticed other people do, but also like things that I did when I was slightly younger than I am now and less informed and less smart, you know? You can build your understanding of your own opinion on a piece of media that you haven't seen based on a perceived consensus of opinion. Like, you know, you watch a bunch of YouTube videos about a piece of media and then you regurgitate that out to someone in real life. Let's say you do that. It's happened. It's been known to happen. I witnessed it happen very recently. And then what? What if the person who you're talking to is suddenly like, hey, actually, what the fuck are you talking about? That puts you in a really bad spot, right? Because in a different situation, you might have, let's say you watched a movie and you talked to someone about it and they disagree with you about the conclusion or whatever. Then you would be in a position to disagree, right? You would be like, okay, well, that surprises me, but I'm prepared to be disagreed with. Whereas if you're entering a conversation with the idea that you belong to a consensus, instead of being enlightened or learning new information, you're going to feel blindsided. And being blindsided is not a good mentality with which to take on new perspectives. You know, it's much better to not be duped into a false sense of consensus. It's just much better. Now, the next point I have is that it's stolen fucking valor, okay? Like, I am a bit of a connoisseur of media that is not amazing, right? Like, I have sat through a number of movies that are considered bad by people in general. And I actually, you know, that's a hobby that I partake in that I greatly enjoy. You know, you sit down with a glass of, my hair is drying and it's doing it badly, but whatever. You sit down with a glass of vodka and you put on the Red Riding Hood adaptation with Amanda Seyfried in it. And it's bad, right? Like, that happens. But then if I talk to someone, online or in real life, who is talking about that media like they've seen it, but they actually haven't, it's like, come on, man. Like, pussy up, dude. You need to actually, don't fucking act like you sat through that shit when you did not. You do not understand the full complexity of The Room if you haven't seen it. Like, don't talk to me like you've watched something when you haven't. Like, the experience of watching a YouTube video, or usually listening to a YouTube video about a 2-hour movie that's bad versus sitting through a 2-hour movie that's bad, is very different. Okay? You know? It's not like I get mad like they're fucking cheating, but it is just a little bit galling, you know? Like, I like to talk to people who have had a similar experience to me and compare it, and finding out that actually you didn't, annoying. Fucking annoying. And also, it's actually good to watch media, listen to media, read media that's bad. It's good. It gives you a better perspective for when you consume media that's good. Like, my understanding of music that I like is vastly improved by having heard music that I don't like. You know, just as an example. Like, you can appreciate something like a good mix on a song more if you've heard whatever that fucking one album is with the angels on the front, you know? What's his name? Corey Feldman, you know? You appreciate a good mix more once you've heard Corey Feldman's music, right? It's just the case. And so I think people are depriving themselves, and YouTubers who make these kinds of videos are intending to deprive people of that kind of learning and experience. Now, on to my next point, which is about plagiarism and mis- and disinformation, okay? I haven't seen anyone make this connection yet. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. But I think the kind of I consume this so you don't have to thing contributes to the epidemic of plagiarism and mis- and disinformation on YouTube specifically, but online in general. Because, and I might read a little bit from my notes here, they're really scrawly, guys. They're really fucking scrawly. But I can read my own handwriting. It's not a problem. You know, people who watched Illuminati's video about Fyre Fest, but not the documentaries that she ripped off, did not recognize that she'd ripped them off, right? Like, if you had seen that documentary, those documentaries, or you had seen the Brian Deere one, then you would have recognized when she was ripping them off, right? And the same is true for James Somerton's videos. This is me, you know, I've been thinking about plagiarism and mis- and disinformation online because of the H. Bomber Guy video more, and I think a lot of people have, so kind of piggybacking off of him on this one, right? You know, pulling out my Zoom call lingo. But yeah, like, you recognize plagiarism less when you are not consuming the original thing that's being plagiarized. And what's often the case with this, like, kind of trickle down information economy thing that I'm saying exists is, like, so at the top here you have these news organizations and streaming platforms and funded writers' rooms. And then at the bottom, disseminating to the peoples, you have fucking YouTubers who have basically no oversight, barely a profit incentive a lot of the time, and who churn shit out as quickly as possible. You know, and that's not to say that bigger corporations don't churn things out as quickly as possible, but you gotta admit, there are more checks and balances there than there are for fucking YouTubers. And so the more we move to YouTubers, the less good the information is. And I think this falls into it. Other stuff like misconceptions around media. I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about Cuties. I'm always thinking about Cuties. You know, kind of known as the pedophile movie, when it really was a movie about pedophilia in our culture being bad. You know, that's kind of what was going on in that one. And that got kind of misconstrued because there were a shit ton of YouTube videos that were like, don't watch this movie. It's a pedophile movie. Here's why. List of things that are of varying understanding, let's say. And so a misconception is born, right? And maybe to use a less heated example, so I read It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, right? It's a book about a woman who gets into an abusive relationship and then gets out of it. That's the book. That's the summary of the book. And I was like, all right, so I read the book, so I'm going to treat myself to some criticism of the book, which I love. I love to consume a piece of media and then consume the criticism about it. It's my favorite thing. Okay, right, so I did that. And lo and behold, several of the YouTube videos and shit that I watched did not mention that not only does the partner in the book, the abusive partner, hit the woman, the main character, he at one point rapes her. He does that. And some of these YouTube videos did not mention that. Did not mention it at all. And I can only speculate as to why. I can speculate that, or, you know, I think there was one that like said SA and did not use the word rape. And I think that's because of the YouTube demonetization system. But like, the fact that the rape happens in the book is like very important to the narrative, I would say, and contributes to, personally, my feeling that the end of the book was inadequate, where the daughter was still had a relationship with the abusive ex-husband. Like, personally, like for me, there's a difference between letting your daughter have a relationship with a man who hit you and letting your daughter have a relationship with a rapist, you know? Like, I feel like there's a difference there. And so in not covering that, you give a different conception of the ending to people who you are telling not to read the book. Okay? Like, there's a clear issue here to me. So, personally, I'm standing and I'm asking, if somebody just straight up fucking lied about the contents of media, which I'm sure has happened, I just don't know any examples, so I'm leaving it as a hypothetical. How long would it take for the people who had been lied to realize that they'd been lied to? Would they? After how long? And would it be all of them? You know, we already have such a mis and disinformation problem online. I think it's really gross the way that people contribute to basically this attitude of not needing to check sources, not needing to check primary texts with these like, oh, I consume this so you don't have to. It's like you're basically telling people not to check. Telling people actually, and often it's formed as like a morally righteous thing too, right? Like, don't give X person your money, which to an extent, like, I understand those things a little bit more, but the like, no, well, this book is bad, so you shouldn't read it, or, and I'm gonna give you all that you need to know, or like, don't worry about this documentary, I got it covered for you. Like, any shit like that is like, it's contributing to the mentality of people who use the internet frequently that the buck stops with the YouTuber. That all you need to do is watch the YouTube video and then you're done. Don't check the bibliography, don't check anything for yourself, don't read, don't listen, don't watch, just click another fucking YouTube video. It's a really... I feel like people haven't connected those two phenomenon, and I'm here to do that because I think it needs to be done, okay? It needs to fucking be done. And then I have another point here. This video is gonna be a little bit of a long one, but whatever. I have a point here. So, one of my other issues, big issue for me, is that these I consumed X so you don't have to videos often have a reactionary bent to them. I don't think that's because the creators intend that. I don't think that's because the audience intends it. I think it is a byproduct of that kind of format, right? Because it's much easier to, when you're making one of these kinds of videos, go, can you believe that in this scene, X does Y to Z, than it is to make a coherent, nuanced argument about the presentation of some certain minority group in the media. It's much easier. And that former thing is much more likely to be a reactionary instinct, right? Like, ooh, gross. Like, disgust, fear, hate, those reactions are the basis of reactionary thought, right? And so I think this kind of approach of like, well, I'm going to give you the summarization of why you shouldn't need to engage with X media causes a more reactionary discourse than would otherwise exist, right? Like, often, the way I think about it is like, if you have a movie that's an hour and a half, there's an hour and a half of content in that movie, right? There's an hour and a half of ideology, there's an hour and a half of themes. Boiling that down to a 30-minute, 20-minute YouTube video, you're inevitably going to be simplifying. You're inevitably going to be cutting down on nuance and basically whatever, systemic critique, whatever. You're going to be cutting it down. And sometimes, there are movies that could have been shorter, whatever. But, my personal opinion is that conservative ideology is the simpler ideology, right? Like, you're saying Black people are poor because they're dumb, instead of actually Black people are poor because of a systemic disinvestment in their housing and schools, and also the criminal justice system, and also the Atlantic slave trade, and also let's talk about the last 200 years of history, and also let's talk about capitalism while we're at it, and there's this guy named Karl Marx. Like, you kind of have to get into all of that, right? Whereas for a conservative conclusion, it's often much simpler. And so I think whenever you're trying to simplify a artistic statement or the ideology specifically that's presented by a piece of art, you're often going to end up making a reactionary argument instead of a progressive one. And I think that's happened multiple times whenever one of these I watched X, I read X so you don't have to things happens. Because, as we saw with The Idol, a lot of it began as coverage of, oh, look, there was some seemingly misogynistic stuff going on behind the scenes. Like, look at what The Weeknd supposedly said about, there being too much of a female focus on the show. And then it kind of spiraled into, look how fucked up and kinky this sex was that they had. Wasn't this sex so fucked up and weird? And wasn't it not hot at all when they were fucking? And actually, there should have been less fucking. And can you believe that they fucked like this in the show? Can you believe they did breath play? Isn't that so fucked up? Like, it became a kind of, aren't we so grossed out by the sexual content? Like, I remember seeing screenshots of the dirty talk in the show with people going like, ew, this is so gross. And that became the takeaway. So even when there was a progressive beginning to the don't watch this bandwagon, it then became a kind of puritanical disgust with sex that is seen as outside of our current society's boundaries of what we think that sex should be, right? Yeah. And I think, that's happened beyond The Idol. It wasn't just the fucking Idol. And I'm not really defending The Idol, really. I'm just saying, like, trying to give an example as to how the instinct to stop people from consuming a certain piece of media or being like, I consumed X, so you don't have to, inevitably results in a more reactionary discourse than otherwise was necessary or begotten by the media. All right. And then my final point, I promise it's the last one, is that this kind of I consumed X so you don't have to thing undercuts actual media that's profitable in a way that is good or decent or whatever, Like, I was thinking about how Pitchfork was recently bought by GQ and is getting fucking gutted. Like, a bunch of staff had been fired, the union kind of busted, like, a lot of just horrible shit all around, right? And I just had this thought, this was kind of what got me started on writing this, that Pitchfork, the news site, the journalism site with the articles on it, will be outlasted by YouTube videos like top 10 most hated Pitchfork reviews. Guess which album Pitchfork gave the lower score videos? That bit by bit, media that is hosted on websites that has unions working behind it, that has fully paid writers and ad blocks for shit that people actually buy, that is being drained away when we actively move from that to freelance YouTubers. Because the thing in this capitalist economy that we live in is that if you can give someone an opportunity to do someone else's work for cheaper and undercut what is making money, they'll do it. That's Uber, that's Fiverr, that's a million other gig economy bullshit sites. Like, someone will always work for less. That's why we need a minimum wage, right? And I say that being someone who, like, if you offered me $50 to do some garden tasks 2 years ago when it would have cost you twice that to hire an actual gardener to do it, I still would have done it, right? Like, I'm not blaming individual people for being like, oh, well, I'm gonna finish a job on Fiverr. Most people who are on Fiverr for genuine business, or Uber drivers or whatever, like, they are, they're not in a great spot. I'm not blaming them. But I am blaming the impetus, okay? I'm blaming the cultural momentum, the economic momentum in that direction. And I think this is just yet another manifestation of that. Instead of paying, if you watch a YouTube video that's like, don't watch this show, I explained it, or whatever, instead of actually watching the show, that means that instead of paying for the show, like buying it outright or going to a streaming service that pays a measly amount to the people who made it, or watching it on television where there are designated ad spots and they pay the royalties on that shit, you are not even really paying a YouTuber to talk at you about it, right? You're paying a YouTuber in your viewership of their sponsors for every bullshit fucking subscription service under the sun and dating mining corporations like fucking Honey, okay? Like, this is not a good business model. This is not a business model that gets people paid. This is why so many YouTubers fucking quit. Like, there's been a lot of YouTubers who have quit their YouTube careers recently. And some of them citing things like burnout. Some of them citing, I kind of reached the pinnacle of these things. Or I've seen a lot of YouTubers talk about how ad revenue is not good. Sponsors are shady. They got fucked over. They got yada, yada, yada. These people are in a much more precarious position than basically the jobs that they're undercutting when they make videos titled, I consumed X, so you don't have to. Like, bleeding actual media industries dry. To what? To have, you enter all your information into some website so that they can pretend to give you discounts, but actually just sell your information to ad targeting agencies so that you can get horrible therapy from BetterHelp. It feels like quite the shit show, I gotta say. Like, this feels like a shit show. This feels like the end times. Not to be all morbid. But that, that's what it feels like. As someone who enjoys art and enjoys critique for art that I have consumed, I really don't like this. I don't like this phenomenon. I don't like this cultural moment that we're having right now. I don't like it. And this year, I basically made a resolution to actually consume more media before and often instead of those videos that are basically a pitch to basically a replacement of fucking Sparks Notes. Because I refuse to make a bad high school English assignment the rest of my life. I refuse to move through my life reading the Sparks Notes instead of experiencing the art itself. I refuse to do that. And I encourage as many people as possible to do the same. And I encourage YouTubers to have a contribution to a conversation about a piece of media that does not rely on people not watching it, not reading it, not listening to it. Like, if all you can do is a summary with some puns and some bad jokes and some very bland criticism sprinkled throughout, get another fucking job. Just get another fucking job. Do something else. Like, come up with something to say, or just stop talking. Love you guys. Bye. This was an angry one, but, don't we all deserve a little anger as a treat? Bye. Love you.